The asteroid field provided perfect cover until it didn't. James Mercer watched his tactical display explode with red warnings as 3 Valkorian interceptors materialized from nowhere, their cloaking technology far superior to Earth's intelligence estimates. His scout ship, the Wanderer, shuddered under the first barrage of plasma fire. Evasive pattern Delta, he barked into the cum. But his co-pilot was already dead, slumped over the console with smoke rising from the shattered navigation panel. James grabbed the manual controls, throwing the ship into a spiraling dive between 2 massive asteroids. The Valkorian ships followed with predatory grace, their sleek hulls gleaming like polished obsidian against the starfield. He'd been tracking their supply routes for 3 weeks, gathering intelligence that could shift the balance of the cold war that had been brewing between Earth and the Valkorian Empire. Command had assured him the mission was low risk, that the aliens rarely patrolled this sector. Another miscalculation that would cost lives. The Wanderer's shields failed with a sound like breaking glass. Warning klaxons screamed as hull integrity dropped to critical levels. James armed the self-destruct sequence, his fingers hovering over the confirmation panel. Better to die than let them extract Earth's military protocols from his ship's computer. But before he could complete the command, his entire vessel went dark. Emergency lighting flickered once, then died. The ship's systems were simply gone. Shut down by technology he couldn't begin to understand through the viewport. James watched as a vessel 10 times the Wanderer's size slid into view. It wasn't one of the interceptors. This was something else entirely. A command ship, perhaps. Its hull marked with symbols that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. A tractor beam locked onto his dead ship, reeling him in like a fish on a line. He tried to restart any system. Anything, but the ship remained lifeless. All he could do was watch as the massive bay doors opened like a mechanical mouth, swallowing him into the belly of the alien warship. The landing was surprisingly gentle. His ship settled onto a deck that gleamed with an organic quality, more grown than built. Through the viewport, James saw the reception committee, a dozen Valkorian soldiers in their characteristic armor. Weapons trained on his vessel, James checked his sidearm, knowing it was useless, but needing the familiar weight in his hand. He took 3 deep breaths, the way they'd taught him in survival training, then manually cranked open the hatch. Humid air rushed in, carrying scents he couldn't identify, sweet and sharp at the same time. He stepped out with his hands raised, his weapon dangling from one finger by the trigger guard. The soldiers moved forward in perfect synchronization, but they didn't fire. Instead, they simply formed a corridor, creating a path toward the bay's exit. James hesitated, confused by the ceremonial quality of it all. Then he understood. This wasn't a standard capture. They'd been waiting for him specifically. She appeared at the far end of the corridor like an apparition. Where the soldiers stood 7 feet tall in their armor, she seemed to glide above the deck, her height accentuated by a form that was both alien and disturbingly beautiful. Her skin held a faint luminescence, pale gold with undertones that shifted between rose and amber as she moved. Unlike the soldiers, she wore flowing garments in deep crimson that left her arms and shoulders bare, revealing the intricate bioluminescent patterns that traced along her skin like living tattoos. Her face stopped him cold. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes like molten amber that seemed to see through him completely. Her hair fell in waves of darkest copper, shot through with strands that gleamed like spun gold. She was stunning in a way that made his chest tighten, and that terrified him more than any weapon. "Captain James Mercer," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the words almost musical. "I am Commander Seraphine Valterra. You've been causing quite a bit of trouble in my sector." James forced himself to meet her gaze. "Then you should have better security." Her smile was slow, dangerous, like a blade being drawn. "Oh, I do. I simply allowed you to think otherwise. Your mission, your route, your timing, all predicted, all permitted. You were never hunting us, Captain. We were hunting you." The implications hit him like a physical blow. If they'd known about his mission, they knew about the intelligence he'd gathered. Worse, they'd let him gather it, which meant everything he'd learned was either useless or deliberately fed to him. 3 weeks of risk for nothing. Why? He asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Seraphine moved closer, her steps silent on the metallic deck. This close, he could see that her eyes weren't uniform in color. They swirled with depths of amber, gold, and something darker, like looking into molten metal. Because I need something from you, Captain. Something that requires your cooperation rather than your corpse. And unlike my more barbaric colleagues, I prefer to obtain what I need through more civilized means. I'll tell you nothing. You misunderstand. She circled him slowly, studying him like a specimen. I don't need you to tell me anything. Earth's military protocols, your defense grids, your fleet positions, we already know all of that. What I need is far more valuable. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. I need you to want to help me. James laughed, a harsh sound. Then you've wasted your time. Have I? Her hand moved faster than he could track, fingers wrapping around his wrist with surprising strength. Her skin was warm, almost hot, and where she touched him, he felt a strange tingling sensation. Your pulse quickens, Captain. Fear or something else? He jerked his hand away, disturbed by his body's reaction. If you're going to kill me, get it over with. Kill you. Seraphine's laugh was like music in a minor key. Oh no, James. I'm going to keep you very much alive. In fact, I'm going to keep you quite close. You'll have quarters near mine, freedom to move through designated areas, access to amenities most prisoners never see. Her smile widened. You might even come to enjoy your captivity. Never. We'll see. She gestured to her soldiers. Escort the captain to the sanctuary deck. Ensure he has everything he needs for comfort. And James? She caught his gaze one more time. Dinner's at 8th cycle. I expect you to join me. Refuse, and your crew on Earth will pay the price. We know exactly where Lieutenant Ortiz is stationed, along with everyone else you care about. The threat was delivered with such casual grace that it took a moment to register. When it did, rage flooded through him, but he forced it down. She had him completely. No escape, no options, no choice but to play whatever game she'd designed, as the soldiers led him away. James glanced back to find Seraphine watching him with an expression he couldn't read. There was interest there, certainly, in calculation. But underneath, something else flickered in those molten eyes. Something that looked almost like loneliness. The walk through the ship revealed its massive scale and alien beauty. The corridors curved in ways that defied human engineering. Their walls embedded with veins of light that pulsed like slow heartbeats. They passed observation decks showing the starfield beyond. Laboratories where alien scientists worked on incomprehensible projects. In common areas where off-duty crew members gathered in small groups, their conversations falling silent as he passed. His quarters, when they finally arrived, were nothing like he'd expected. The room was vast, easily 40 feet across, with a transparent wall offering a panoramic view of space. The furnishings were alien, but clearly designed for comfort. Surfaces that adjusted to body weight. Lighting that responded to movement. Even what appeared to be a bathing area with water that glowed with soft blue light. This is a mistake, James said to the guards. I'm a prisoner. One of them, the only one who'd spoken during the entire walk, responded in heavily accented but clear English. Commander's orders. You are guest prisoner. Status unclear. Treatment generous. Then they left, the door sealing behind them with a soft hiss. James stood alone in luxury that felt like a mockery, staring out at the infinite dark and wondering what Seraphine Valtara really wanted from him, and more troubling, why part of him was curious to find out. The dangerous game, the dinner summons, came precisely at 8th cycle, delivered by a young Valkorian attendant who spoke no English, but made the expectation clear through gestures. James had considered refusing, weighing the threat against his crew versus his own pride. But ultimately, he knew defiance would be meaningless. Seraphine had already demonstrated how thoroughly she controlled the situation. The attendant led him through different corridors this time, these ones wider and more ornate. The walls here displayed slowly shifting artwork, scenes of alien worlds and civilizations rendered in what appeared to be living light. Other high-ranking officers passed them, their gazes lingering on James with open curiosity or barely concealed contempt. He kept his expression neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing his unease. They arrived at a set of doors that opened onto a private dining chamber. The room was intimate rather than grand, designed for conversation rather than display. One wall showed the same panoramic star view as his quarters, while the others featured more of the living artwork. In the center, a table had been set with what James assumed were Velcorian equivalents of fine dining implements. Though many of them defied any purpose he could identify, Seraphine stood by the viewing wall, her back to him, silhouetted against the cosmos. She'd changed from her earlier crimson garments into something darker, a dress of deep violet that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When she turned, James felt his breath catch despite himself. The garment clung to her form in ways that were definitely intentional, and the bioluminescent patterns on her exposed skin glowed brighter than before, tracing elegant lines down her arms and across her collarbone. "Captain Mercer," she greeted him with that dangerous smile. "I'm pleased you decided to accept my invitation. You didn't leave me much choice." "There's always choice, James. You simply chose correctly." She gestured to the table. "Please, sit. I promise the food won't poison you. We've studied human biology extensively." That statement should have been reassuring, but somehow made everything worse. James took the offered seat, watching as she settled across from him with fluid grace. Up close, in the softer lighting, she was even more striking. Her eyes caught and held the ambient light, making them seem to glow from within. Attendants appeared, serving dishes that ranged from recognizable to utterly alien. Some items on his plate moved slightly, which James tried very hard to ignore. Seraphine ate with delicate precision, her movements hypnotic in their elegance. "Now wondering why you're here," she said, after a few moments of silence. "Not just at this dinner, but why you specifically were captured." The thought crossed my mind. My empire stands at a crossroads. She set down her utensil, giving him her full attention. There are factions within the Velcoran High Command that believe humanity represents an existential threat. They want preemptive war, complete eradication of your species before you can develop technology that might challenge us. James felt his blood run cold. That's genocide. Yes. Her expression remained calm, but something dark flickered in her eyes. And there are others, my faction, who believe such action would be both morally reprehensible and strategically foolish. Humanity has proven resourceful, innovative, in ways we are not. War would be costly, perhaps unwinnable. But to convince my superiors of this, I need proof. I need detailed knowledge of human capabilities, weaknesses, psychology. I need to understand what makes your species worth preserving. So you kidnapped me to study humans? I kidnapped you because you're perfect for my needs. She leaned forward slightly. You're experienced enough to have valuable insights, but not so high-ranking that your disappearance will trigger an immediate military response. You're intelligent, educated, with psychological profiles that suggest adaptability and pragmatism. And according to our intelligence, you have personal reasons to want to prevent war. James stiffened. What do you know about my personal life? Your sister lives on New Terra Colony with her 2 children. Your mother is in the Veterans Facility on Earth's moon. You have 17 people you consider close friends scattered across 3 star systems. Her voice softened slightly. War would put all of them at risk. I'm offering you a chance to prevent that. By betraying my species. By saving it. Seraphine's hand moved across the table, stopping just short of touching his. I don't want military secrets, James. I want to understand humanity. Your art, your culture, your capacity for love and sacrifice, and all the things that make you more than just another species to be conquered or destroyed. Help me show my people that humans are worth the risk of peace. It was a compelling argument delivered with apparent sincerity. But James had been trained to resist manipulation. And if I refuse, then I'll find another way, and it will take longer, and more humans will die when the war faction inevitably gets what it wants. She pulled her hand back, her expression hardening. I'm not your enemy, Captain. I'm the only thing standing between your species and extinction. But I can't do it alone. The rest of the dinner passed in tense conversation. Seraphine asked questions about Earth, about human customs and beliefs. And despite his reservations, James found himself answering. There was something intoxicating about her interest, the way she listened with complete focus. Her alien features showing genuine fascination with every detail. When the meal ended, she walked him to the door personally. In the corridor's dimmer lighting, standing close enough that he could feel the heat from her skin, she looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "These dinners will continue," she said softly. "Every evening, 8th cycle, we'll talk, learn from each other, perhaps even become something approaching friends. And in time, James, you'll understand that I'm offering you something more valuable than freedom." Her fingers brushed his arm, that same tingling sensation spreading from the contact. "I'm offering you purpose." Back in his quarters, James stood at the viewing wall for hours, watching distant stars and trying to process everything. Seraphine was dangerous, not just because of her position or her beauty, but because part of him wanted to believe her, wanted to think that this impossible situation might actually lead to something good. The next evening, he returned to her dining chamber, and the evening after that. Each dinner lasted longer than the previous one, their conversations ranging from philosophy to history to personal experiences. Seraphine shared stories of her own upbringing in the rigid hierarchy of Valkorian nobility, the pressures and expectations that had shaped her. James found himself reciprocating, talking about his military career, his failed marriage, the weight of command. On the 5th night, she touched his hand deliberately, her fingers intertwining with his as she explained a concept in Valkorian culture that had no human equivalent. Her skin was hot against his, and James didn't pull away. The line between captor and captive was beginning to blur, replaced by something far more dangerous. "You're beautiful when you smile," she said suddenly, catching him off guard. "You should do it more often. It's hard to smile when you're a prisoner." "Then perhaps I should give you more reasons." Her thumb traced small circles on the back of his hand. "Tell me, James, in your culture, how do humans show affection?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. James knew he should pull away, should maintain distance, but he found himself leaning closer instead. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I find myself curious about you specifically, not just humanity in general." Her eyes searched his face. "Because these evenings have become the part of my day I anticipate most. Because you make me feel things that Valkorians are taught to suppress. And I'm discovering I don't want to suppress them anymore." James's heart hammered in his chest. This was manipulation, had to be, but it felt real. Her vulnerability seemed genuine, the slight uncertainty in her voice, the way her bioluminescent patterns pulsed faster when he looked at her directly. "Seraphine, this is wrong? Impossible? Dangerous?" She stood, moving around the table to stand before him. "Yes to all of those. And yet here we are." Her hand rose to his face, cupping his jaw with surprising gentleness. "I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give, James, but I won't pretend I don't want you. I'm done pretending." When he kissed her, it was a mistake and a revelation all at once. Her lips were hot against his, her body pressing close with a desperate hunger that matched his own. Whatever game they'd been playing was over. This was real, terrifying, and utterly inevitable. They broke apart after a moment that felt like eternity, both breathing hard. Seraphine's eyes were wild, her composed facade shattered. "My quarters," she whispered. Now, James knew he should refuse, should maintain whatever professional distance still existed between them. But as she led him through the corridors, her hand gripping his with fierce determination, he realized he'd already made his choice. Right or wrong, he was falling into this abyss with his eyes open, and God help him, he didn't want to stop. Seraphine's private quarters were more elaborate than his, a suite of rooms that spoke of both power and isolation. She led him through a sitting area filled with artifacts from dozens of worlds into her sleeping chamber, where a massive platform dominated the space. The bed, if it could be called that, seemed almost alive. its surface rippling with subtle bioluminescence that responded to their presence. They stood facing each other in the dim light, the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on them both. James reached for her first, his hands finding the fastenings of her dress with fumbling urgency. The fabric slid away, revealing skin that glowed with intricate patterns, constellations of light that traced paths across her body like a map to somewhere forbidden. Wait, she breathed, catching his hands. Her eyes met his, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen. I need you to understand something. For my people, this kind of connection, it's not casual. When we bond with someone, it leaves a mark. Literally. The bioluminescent patterns will change. We'll mirror each other. Everyone will know. I don't care. It will make you a target. My rivals will see you as a weakness to exploit. Her fingers tightened on his, and it will make leaving impossible. For both of us. James pulled her close, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. Then we don't leave. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and felt her resistance crumble. Her body melted against his as she surrendered to the moment. To the impossible connection that had been building between them since that first dinner. What followed was unlike anything James had experienced with human partners. Seraphine's skin seemed to respond to his touch. The bioluminescent patterns brightening and shifting, creating waves of light that followed his hands. Her body temperature ran hot, almost uncomfortably so at first, but his body adjusted, drawing him deeper into the sensation. She moved with inhuman grace, her extra flexibility allowing for intimacy that was both alien and intoxicating. When they finally collapsed together, tangled in sheets that felt like liquid silk, James watched in amazement as new patterns emerged on his own skin. Faint lines of light traced across his chest and arms, mirror images of the designs on Seraphine. She traced them with gentle fingers, her expression mixing wonder and fear. "It's done," she whispered. "You're marked now. Mine in a way that my people will recognize." "Good." He pulled her closer, feeling her heart beating rapid against his chest. Let them see. But as the cycles passed and their affair continued, James began to understand the true danger of their situation. Other Valkorian officers started regarding him with open hostility. Seraphine's political position became increasingly precarious. He overheard heated arguments in corridors outside her quarters, voices raised in the musical Valkorian language that his translator struggled to parse. One evening, Seraphine arrived at their usual dinner time with visible bruises on her arms, quickly covered when she saw his concern. "It's nothing," she insisted, but her hands shook as she poured drinks. "Just a disagreement with Commander Thane's faction, a disagreement that left marks. My people are not gentle when we fight." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The war faction grows stronger. James, they point to my relationship with you as proof that I've been compromised, that I care more for human life than Valkorian supremacy. Then end it. Send me back." Even as he said it, the thought of leaving her made his chest ache. "I can't," her voice broke. "Not just because of the bond, though that makes separation painful, but because you're the only evidence I have that humans are capable of depth, of connection beyond their own species. The reports I've been filing, the cultural analyses I've been building with your help, they're the only thing keeping the war faction from launching their assault. If I give up now, if I send you away, they'll attack Earth within a lunar cycle." James moved to her, pulling her into his arms despite the risk of being seen through the windows. "Then we fight. Together. Whatever it takes." That night, they didn't make love. Instead, they planned. Seraphine revealed the full scope of the political battle she was fighting. The delicate alliances she'd built, the evidence she was gathering of human potential. James contributed everything he knew about Earth's defenses, but also about humanity's capacity for diplomacy, art, sacrifice. All the things that made his species more than just another military threat. "There's a council meeting in 3 cycles," Seraphine said, as dawn light began filtering through the windows. "I'll be presenting my final argument against the war initiative. If I can convince enough of the High Command, we might prevent the conflict. But if I fail, you won't fail." James tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "We won't fail. But 2 cycles later, everything fell apart. James was in his quarters, reviewing documents Seraphine had given him to help prepare her presentation, when his door burst open. 3 Valkorian soldiers, not Seraphine's people but members of Commander Thane's personal guard, stormed in with weapons drawn. "You're under arrest," the lead soldier announced, "for espionage, sedition, and corruption of a superior officer." James reached for anything he could use as a weapon, but they were on him before he could react. The last thing he saw before the stun weapon discharged was the reflection in the window. The bioluminescent marks on his skin glowing bright in the darkness, like evidence of his betrayal. James woke in a real cell this time, not the luxurious quarters Seraphine had provided. The space was barely large enough to stand in. Walls of solid metal with no windows, lit by harsh white light that hurt his eyes. His head throbbed from the stun weapon, and his mouth tasted of copper and regret. Hours passed, or maybe days. There was no way to track time in the featureless cell. Guards brought food at irregular intervals, gray nutrient paste that tasted like nothing. They ignored his questions, his demands to see Seraphine, his attempts to invoke whatever prisoner rights might exist in Valkorian law. When the cell door finally opened, it wasn't Seraphine, but Commander Thane who entered. The Valkorian was massive, even by his species standards. Built like a weapon and carrying himself with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight. His face was scarred, one eye replaced with a mechanical implant that glowed red in the dim light. "The human pet," Thane said, his voice like grinding stone, "I must admit, you exceeded my expectations. I thought Seraphine would tire of you within cycles. Instead, you managed to corrupt her completely." "I didn't corrupt anyone. She made her own choices, did she?" Thane circled him like a predator. "Or did you manipulate her with your primitive charm, exploiting her isolation and curiosity? You saw an opportunity and took it, just as your species always does. Parasites, feeding on the sympathy of your betters." James forced himself to stay calm. "Where is she?" "If you've hurt her, you'll what? Fight me." Thane laughed, a harsh sound. "Seraphine's being dealt with. Her position is forfeit, her political allies abandoning her to save themselves. The bond marks you share are being exhibited as evidence of her mental compromise. In 3 days, the council will vote for war, and there's nothing either of you can do to stop it. Then why keep me alive? Because your death serves a purpose." Thane leaned close, his breath hot and sour. "When you're executed publicly, broadcast to Earth's communication networks, it will show humanity what happens to those who think they can bargain with us. Your corpse will be the first casualty of the coming war." After Thane left, James slumped against the wall, fighting despair. Everything he and Seraphine had worked for was collapsing. Worse, she was suffering because of their relationship, paying the price for his weakness. He should have been stronger, should have resisted the connection between them. Instead, he'd given in to his desires and doomed them both. The cell door opened again, and this time it was Seraphine. But not the composed commander he'd grown to know. She looked shattered, her clothing torn, one eye swollen shut. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin flickering erratically like dying stars. 2 guards flanked her, weapons trained on both of them. 5 minutes, one guard announced. Council's mercy, allowing final words between conspirators. As soon as they were alone, Seraphine rushed to him, her hands frantically checking him for injuries. "James, God, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have been more careful, should have protected you better." "Stop." He caught her hands, holding them still. "You did everything you could. This isn't on you. They're going to kill you." Tears streamed down her face, glowing faintly as they fell. "In 3 days, public execution, and I'm being forced to watch as punishment for my treason. They want me to see what my choices cost, to break me completely before they strip my rank and exile me." James pulled her close, feeling her body shake against his. The marks on his skin pulsed in sync with hers, their bond making her pain his own. "Listen to me. You can still stop the war. When I'm dead, use it. Tell them my execution proved humans can be beaten, that we're not the threat they imagine. Make them see that genocide isn't necessary. I won't use your death for politics. Her voice was fierce despite the tears. "I won't let you become just another sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice if it saves billions of lives." He tilted her face up, memorizing every detail of her alien features. "Serafini, I love you. I know that's impossible. I know it makes no sense, but it's true. And because I love you, I need you to survive this. Promise me you'll keep fighting for peace, even after I'm gone. I can't lose you." She kissed him desperately, tasting of salt and starlight. "There has to be another way." "There isn't. But maybe... ... An idea formed, desperate and dangerous. "You said the bond marks mirror each other, that they're evidence of our connection. What if we use that? What if you present me at the council not as your victim or your corruptor, but as proof that humans can bond with Valkorians? That our species are compatible in ways that make war a tragedy rather than a necessity?" Seraphine pulled back, her eyes widening. "That's insane. The council would never accept such a radical proposal. But it might buy time. Plant seeds of doubt. Make some of them wonder if there's another path." James gripped her shoulders. "You're not asking them to love humans. You're asking them to see us as potential allies instead of inevitable enemies. Use our bond as the foundation for that argument. And when they reject it and kill you anyway, then at least we tried." He pressed his forehead to hers, feeling her heat, her life. The connection that would remain even after death severed their physical bond. "Promise me you'll try." The guards returned before she could answer, dragging her away as she screamed his name. But in her eyes, James saw acceptance, understanding, and the terrible determination of someone with nothing left to lose. The next 3 days were agony, but James used the time to prepare himself for what was coming. Death didn't frighten him as much as the thought of his execution sparking the very war he and Seraphine had tried to prevent. He could only hope her presentation to the council would be enough, that their impossible love would serve some purpose beyond their own tragedy. On the morning of his execution, they came for him in ceremonial armor, treating him with the formal respect afforded to worthy adversaries. They led him through corridors filled with Valkorian citizens who'd gathered to witness the spectacle. Some showed curiosity, others pure hatred, but many looked uncertain, conflicted in ways that gave James a spark of hope. The execution chamber was vast, amphitheater style, with the council seated in elevated positions around a central platform. James was brought to stand in the middle, exposed and vulnerable, while thousands watched both in person and through broadcast feeds that would transmit his death across multiple star systems. Commander Thane stood as executor, holding a weapon that looked more like a work of art than an instrument of death. But before he could begin the formal proceedings, Seraphine stepped onto the platform. She'd been cleaned up, dressed in formal robes, but the damage to her face remained visible, a deliberate choice that spoke volumes. "I invoke ancient right," she announced, her voice carrying through the chamber. "Right of testimony before execution. The council cannot refuse." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Thane looked furious, but several council members nodded. Apparently, this was legitimate, if rarely invoked. Seraphine had found a loophole, bought them precious minutes to make their final argument. She launched into a presentation that was part political treatise, part confession, part plea for understanding. She spoke of her relationship with James not as weakness, but as exploration. As evidence that the chasm between their species was not unbridgeable, she showed the bond marks, explained their significance in Valkorian culture, argued that their very existence proved compatibility rather than corruption. James watched the council members, trying to read their alien expressions. Some remained hostile, convinced that Seraphine had been compromised beyond redemption. But others leaned forward, listening with genuine interest, especially the younger members who'd never experienced war firsthand. When Seraphine finished, silence hung heavy in the chamber. Then one of the elder council members stood, a female whose name James didn't know, but whose authority was evident in how others deferred to her. "Commander Valterra's testimony is compelling," the elder said slowly. "But testimony cannot override security concerns. The human's execution will proceed." However, she raised her hand as Thane moved forward eagerly. The question of war will be revisited in light of this new evidence. A committee will be formed to study the implications of interspecies bonding. The vote for offensive action is postponed indefinitely. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't total defeat either. James met Seraphine's eyes across the platform and saw the same bittersweet understanding. They'd bought humanity time, perhaps enough to build real peace. The price was his life, and as Thane raised the execution weapon, James found he could accept that trade. The weapon hung in the air, its energy coils humming with deadly power. James braced himself for the end, his only regret that he couldn't hold Seraphine one last time. But then chaos erupted from an unexpected quarter. A massive explosion rocked the amphitheater, tearing through the eastern wall in a cascade of fire and debris. Alarm systems screamed as sections of the ceiling collapsed, sending council members scrambling for safety. Through the smoke and confusion, James saw armed figures pouring through the breach, their armor marking them as members of a faction he didn't recognize. "Seraphine, get down!" he shouted, but she was already moving, diving toward him as weapons fire lit up the chamber. She reached him in seconds, her hands working frantically at his restraints, while chaos swirled around them. "What's happening?" James demanded as the magnetic cuffs released, freeing his hands. "Rebellion," she gasped, pulling him behind a fallen column as plasma bolts scorched the air where they'd been standing. Third faction, hidden until now. They oppose both the Warhawks and the peace advocates. They want to overthrow the entire council structure. Commander Thane emerged from the smoke like an avenging demon, his weapon trained not on James but on Seraphine. "You brought this on us," he roared. "Your weakness, your perversion with the human, it's infected everything. The Empire is tearing itself apart because you couldn't control yourself." The Empire was already broken, Seraphine shot back, rising to face him despite James's attempt to hold her back. "I just exposed the cracks. You want to blame someone? Look at your own faction, pushing for genocide when we should be building alliances." Thane's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, one of the rebel soldiers tackled him from behind. The two Valkorians went down in a tangle of limbs and fury, their fight spilling across the blood-slicked platform. More rebel forces poured in, and James realized with growing horror that this wasn't just an attack on the council, it was a full-scale coup attempt. "We have to get out of here," he told Seraphine, grabbing her arm. "Whatever happens with their politics, we're not safe." She hesitated, torn between escape and duty, but another explosion made the decision for her. They ran together through corridors filled with smoke and screaming, dodging firefights and collapsing architecture. Seraphine navigated with practiced ease, despite the chaos. Leading them through maintenance passages that most wouldn't know existed, they emerged in a hangar bay, where ships were launching in panic. Crews desperate to escape the violence consuming the command vessel. Seraphine made straight for a sleek scout ship, smaller than James's Wanderer, but clearly built for speed. She bypassed the security protocols with command codes that somehow still worked, and they scrambled aboard as the hangar shook with another series of explosions. "Can you fly this?" James asked as they strapped into the pilot seats. "Watch me." Her hands flew over the controls with desperate precision, bringing the engines online even as the hangar's atmospheric shields began failing. They launched through the opening bay doors with seconds to spare, the ship shuddering as debris struck their shields. Behind them, the massive command vessel was tearing itself apart from within, secondary explosions blooming along its hull like deadly flowers. Other ships scattered in all directions, some fleeing, others engaging in mid-space battles as the Civil War spread beyond the amphitheater. The carefully maintained structure of Valkorian military hierarchy was collapsing in real time. Seraphine set a course away from the combat zone, pushing the engines to their limits. Only when they'd put significant distance between themselves and the chaos did she finally allowed herself to collapse back in her seat, her whole body shaking. "It's over," she whispered. "Everything I worked for, everyone I tried to protect, all of it gone." James reached across the narrow space between their seats, taking her hand. The bond marks on their skin pulsed in sync, a reminder of the connection that had survived against impossible odds. Not everything. We're alive. And that means we still have a chance to make this mean something. How? She turned to him, her eyes haunted. The Council is destroyed. The factions are at war with each other. Earth will see this as their opportunity to strike while we're weak. The peace we tried to build, it's already ashes, and we don't go to the Council or the military. We go directly to Earth, to people who might actually listen. James felt the idea crystallizing as he spoke. You have intelligence about Valkorian factions, internal conflicts. Proof that your empire isn't the unified threat? Earth believes it is. I have knowledge of human command structures who might be willing to negotiate rather than attack. Together, we could broker something new, treaty built on our relationship. Despite her despair, a spark of hope flickered in her voice. Most would see that as naive at best, delusional at worst. Maybe, but what's the alternative? We hide, spend whatever time we have left running from both our peoples? Or we fight for the future we talked about in those dinners, when it was just you and me, and the possibility that things could be different. He squeezed her hand tighter. I'm not ready to give up on us, or on peace. Are you? Seraphine studied him for a long moment, and James saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was weighing risks, considering angles, thinking like the commander she'd always been. But when she finally spoke, her words were simple and human in a way that made his chest ache. No, I'm not ready to give up. She adjusted their course, plotting a new destination. There's a neutral station at the edge of the border zone. Independent traders, information brokers, people who exist outside official channels. We can make contact with Earth's representatives there, lay the groundwork for negotiation. It's risky, and there's no guarantee anyone will listen. But it's a chance. James felt something he hadn't experienced since his capture, genuine hope. That's more than we had an hour ago. The journey to the neutral station took 3 days of hard flying, constantly scanning for pursuit from either Valkorian or human forces. They took turns at the controls, sleeping in shifts, surviving on emergency rations that tasted equally terrible to both their species. In the close confines of the scout ship, there was no privacy, no luxury. Just the two of them and the growing realization of how much they'd sacrificed for each other. On the second night, with the ship on autopilot and stars streaming past the viewport, they made love in the cramped sleeping quarters. It was different from their passionate encounters in Seraphine's luxurious chambers. This was desperate and raw, two people clinging to each other in the darkness, seeking comfort and connection in a universe that had become hostile to their very existence. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bunk, their bond marks glowing softly in the dark. What happens to us if this works? Seraphine asked quietly. If we somehow manage to broker peace, where do we fit in either of our worlds? James traced patterns on her shoulder, following the lines of light that marked her as his. I don't know. Maybe nowhere. Maybe everywhere. Maybe we become symbols of what's possible. Or maybe we end up exiled from both sides, too dangerous to keep around. He kissed her forehead gently. But we'll be together. That's what matters to me. James, I need to tell you something. Her voice carried a weight he hadn't heard before. The bond between us, it's not just emotional or physical. There are biological components that your human doctors didn't account for when we first came together. The marks, they're not just for show. They indicate a synchronization at the cellular level. What are you saying? I'm saying that separating now would be medically dangerous for both of us. Our bodies have adapted to each other's chemistry in ways that make long-term separation potentially fatal. She met his eyes in the dim light. If you change your mind, if you decide you want to return to your purely human life, I would understand. But we'd need to undergo medical intervention, and even then, there's no guarantee we'd survive intact. The revelation should have terrified him, should have felt like a trap closing around his freedom. Instead, James felt an odd sense of peace. Good, he said simply. Removes the temptation to run when things get hard. We're committed now, for better or worse. You're not angry that I didn't tell you before? Would it have changed anything? When she didn't answer, he pulled her closer. We made our choice, Seraphine. Both of us eyes open. Whatever consequences come, we face them together.